नरेंद्र दामोदर दास मोदी,
I, Subramaniam Jaishankar,
What has India achieved on the global stage in the last 10 years, and what is or should be India's foreign policy for the next 5 under Modi 3.0? That's what we are discussing today with Ambassador Pankaj Saran. He's the convener of NatStrat. He's been India's Deputy NSA and also ex-envoy to Russia and Bangladesh. I'm great to see you after a while.
Thank you, Amitabh. Great to be back with you.
And just wanted your views on, if you give us a macro picture of what you think India has achieved in these last 10 years in the foreign policy sphere. Where are we currently on the global stage?
Yeah, I think if I have to sum it up, because it's complex, clearly India's profile has grown hugely in the last 10 years. I mean, that's one clear takeaway from the last 10 years of Indian foreign policy. And this has happened for many reasons. I think you have found India where it mattered. You have found the pursuit of a very confident and robust policy, trying to maximize gains wherever there were opportunities available. And also, I think the way in which we have steered through so many international crises, both unforeseen and foreseen, is also one of the more, visible aspects of the success. So I would say nothing succeeds like success. And there is actually no real area where you haven't succeeded, both when it comes to opportunity as well as when it comes to adversity. So by opportunity, I mean basically the increase in your relationship with the United States in the breadth and the scope of that relationship. And also on global issues, you're definitely much more visible. You have chosen to articulate and position yourself. But it's not just that. The fact is you have something to say. And you have your domestic experiences to bring to the table. And there is greater acceptability of India. In terms of adversity, I would say obviously the way in which we've handled China has been a great lesson for all of us. The way we've handled the COVID pandemic, and of course now how we are handling the Gaza conflict. So all in all, I would say the success lies in the fact that you are much more in action. Secondly, your approaches and policies have contributed to the overall national aim, which is economic and social development of the nation.
In the light of that, and especially since this is the third term, so there would be possibly a desire to make more of a mark, especially on the foreign or global scene. Where do you see India moving, and where should we be moving? I know, again, it's a complex question to sum up in a nutshell.
I think we were on the right track, actually, in the last few years. So I would expect the government to do more of the same, rather than try to do something dramatically different. When it comes to, if you look at the major powers, and if you come to the neighborhood, and then if you look at some of the global issues, if we try to break it up into these three broad clusters, then I would say as far as the major powers are concerned, I think we've done fairly well. We've navigated the Ukraine conflict very well, to the extent that there is much greater understanding today of the Indian position than there was when the conflict began. And there is acceptance of the Indian position. With regard to your neighbors, I think there have been ups and downs, there have been difficult periods, which has always been the case when you're dealing with our kind of neighborhood. But on the whole, there have been also big success stories in how you have emerged as a first responder, as someone who enters a crisis situation and tries to help the neighbor, as someone who's just building up connectivities relentlessly. And Pakistan, of course, is a challenge. And I think the policy with Pakistan has been fine. I think we abrogated Article 370. The consequence of that has been a dramatic improvement in the situation in Kashmir in terms of so many indices. The dialogue with Pakistan is not really germane to your neighborhood policy anymore. But you have managed to uphold or not uphold, but adhere to the ceasefire on the line of control. With regard to China, we can come to that. Obviously, there was a serious challenge in 2020. So the last 4 years, again, have been influenced by what happened at that time. When it comes to global issues, I think, again, here we've done very well. I mean, whether it is climate, whether it is technology, whether it is energy, whether it is, even things like semiconductors and other forms of FDI which you need for your economy. I think we've done very well. And I think the G20 presidency, that whole exercise, was a great example of trying to put an Indian stand or an Indian voice on so many global issues. So obviously, when you are pursuing such a forward policy, you will meet with successes, but you also may meet with failures. And I think that's pretty much part of the whole philosophy of trying to be a little more risk-taking rather than risk-averse, but also at the same time not being foolhardy or rash. And I think that's been the signature of the foreign policy. But, for me, what is actually most important is the fact that foreign policy, the pursuit of foreign policy, or India's interests overseas, have been grounded and rooted very firmly in the larger enterprise of nation building. So there is a circular relationship between the pursuit of a certain kind of foreign policy and your national economic goals, and those economic goals being pursued and being promoted through the pursuit of foreign policy. So we are seeing a much more integrated approach to this whole enterprise, rather than it being in silos. So the fruits of that are beginning to bear fruit. I mean, you find much better investment climate for India. You find a much more easier flow of technologies. The fact that India is today talking about semiconductors, it's talking about biofuels, it's leveraging its solar and wind energy, resources. It's talking about artificial intelligence, and I think we will hear more about it in the next few days, actually, at the G7. So all these are new aspects. Similarly, when it comes to the transformation of a developing country or an economy, what I think India has been able to do is to convert its domestic successes into an example for other countries to follow. Now that applies primarily to your digital public infrastructure, to how you leverage technology for poverty alleviation, for social and economic growth. So all of this I find very interesting. So what we have actually is a situation where, in a sense, you can argue that the whole of the government of India, in some way or the other, is pursuing your foreign policy goals. It's going beyond the classical, activities of international trade, which we know about, but it's transcending into non-traditional areas like health, pharmaceuticals, disaster management, handling your diaspora. So that, I think, is a function of obviously a stable and a strong leadership, which has been able to, pull together all the different strands of the bureaucracy into this kind of a, composite whole. And that's, I think, maybe something which I hope will continue in the future.
Let's take it strand by strand, as you were talking about, to do a little bit more or a deep dive. Say, when you're talking about the China challenge, how do you foresee it moving ahead? what goes through Xi Jinping's mind in terms of India as a priority? Is India even on his radar? Do we expect more clashes on the LAC? I mean, where do you see that progressing? Of course, our border infrastructure, we're building up. Military capabilities, we're building up. That differential is narrowing. I mean, it's still wide, but it's narrowing. But where do you see the India-China relationship?
Yeah, I think, this is by far going to be the most challenging aspect of our foreign policy for the next 5 years, and for many reasons. And it's not just what Xi Jinping thinks. I mean, to my mind, the statement which the Prime Minister made on China to one of the Western media outlets a few weeks ago was one of the most remarkable statements that has come out at his level on China. It was a short statement of 5-6 lines or sentences, but it actually revealed a lot, and it was immediately picked up by the Chinese. And they understood and realized this was a signal. Now the question is how much of that statement or that sentiment is reflective of a desire on the part of Modi 3.0 to try and steer the ship a little more in a certain direction when it comes to China. You have obviously already seen that when it comes to your trade and economic relationship with China, it is actually moving along really fast. Of course, there is an imbalance, which is a concern, but the fact is that the trade is moving, is going on.
But isn't that a contradiction?
It is. I mean, but this is a contradiction almost every country has with China. I mean, if you look at the European trade or the American trade with China, you have this duality of huge economic integration, but yet strategic dissonance and contestation, which is also fairly fierce. I suspect we are also in that same boat. I think from our point of view, we will try to reduce tensions with China, try and find some way to restore the relationship. A lot of it is going to depend on the Chinese and how they perceive India as a whole. But my feeling is that we will see some movement, some melting of the ice as far as China is concerned. It will be gradual, it will be deliberate, but I will certainly see some shifting sands. To what extent, that's a different question, but there would be some, small steps, and there will be opportunities in the next 6 months for meetings, etc. We have to also see the level of rhetoric on both sides. And we have to see the overall atmosphere. Is that being kind of, let's say, reduced in terms of trying to make, restoration and resumption of dialogue easier? It will be a gradual process. But my feeling is also that the Chinese are deeply interested also in re-engaging India. And I don't think their continued hardline hostility towards India is of any benefit to them. They are also under severe pressure internally, economically, strategically from the United States and others. So I think there is also interest in the Chinese to try and use this opportunity to maybe make some adjustments in the relationship in the direction of restoration of some kind of normalcy.
You mentioned the US earlier, and there's been tremendous progress over the years and decades between India and the US in the relationship, multifacets. There are some who criticize it in terms of, is India putting too many of its eggs in the US basket?
Yeah. No, that's always been, See, there's something to be said about India's, what I call strategic genetic code. There is something about India which dictates that Indian strategic thinking has always been very conscious and about its strategic I don't want to use the word autonomy, but very conscious of its right to independent decision making. So this will always inform your relationship with the United States. But yet, I think the relationship has grown tremendously in the last few years. And it's good because we need the United States for many reasons, for our own national economic development project. And there is a convergence of interests, which today is quite palpable. But I would say that you should not reduce this relationship to only being a relationship against someone. You have to make it and convert it into a positive agenda. And there will be differences. As we interact more, you will have differences on things like trade, on investment, on intellectual property, even on mutual expectations of each other when it comes to the Indo-Pacific or the Quad. So on strategic issues, there will be some, it's not necessarily the case that we're going to think alike.
Yeah.
And I think greater dialogue with the United States is important so that we have this understanding with each other. Obviously, we are democracies, but India is situated in a certain geography, at a certain level of its development. So these realities have to be taken into account. But I would say, yes, the relationship has matured. Look, a lot is going to depend on the US elections.
Yeah.
Because, it's very personality driven. So although there is a bipartisan support for India, we have learned from history that personalities matter, both when it comes to how they engage India, how they engage the Chinese, and so on and so forth. So I think the next few months we'll see a bit of a kind of a status quo the atmosphere in the relationship till they settle down early next year. And then you will see maybe fresh initiatives from both sides. So that's how I look at the United States.
You pointed out how India has managed to convey its necessities vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukraine war, when the world has begun or has changed from the beginning of the war to now to understanding India's position. How do you feel Russia understands India's position as well as, say, we're talking about the US or diversification, if I want to use that word, away from Russia? Is Russia understanding that part of it?
I think initially the Russians were quite happy with the stand we took, because I suspect there were some parts of their establishment which were not really confident that India would be able to take the position it took. But now I think they've settled down to it. I think for them today, more than ever before, keeping channels open with India is critical for them. Being in the situation that they are, they need every friend in the world that they can get. And India for them, from that point of view, is important. And I think, therefore, they understand the Indian position. Obviously, they would expect more from India, just as the Americans expect. But, more importantly, when you hear in the last few months statements coming out from both sides, they're troublesome because the levels of tension and public rhetoric are very high. And this is not good for anyone. And so it gives you a feeling of a little bit of being on the edge, because if the rhetoric is not winding down, but is escalating at every opportunity, then naturally you're worried. And the other problem is that how much of it can you influence as an Indian, as India? How much can you reduce the rhetoric from both sides? Because what we are hearing essentially from both sides is that there is no mood for dialing down. To the contrary, there is a constant refrain that we are in it for now and forever. And that, opens a lot of opportunities for errors, mistakes, etc. Here again, I think the future scenario is going to depend a lot on the US elections. So at this juncture, I think what India had said from day one, that, you have to go back to dialogue and diplomacy, is really the only way out. Because if you look at the statements from the United States leadership and Europe on Ukraine, on Russia, they don't give you much hope for any early reduction of tension, and vice versa from Moscow. So, but as I said in the beginning, Russia is extremely keen to maintain its relationship with India at this point. And this is a good opportunity for us to keep that relationship also going. And of course, we need them for our own reasons. The question is whether we continue with that relationship based on past practices, or we try to reconfigure the relationship with an eye on the future rather than on the past. And I think that exercise is very much underway, it seems to me.
Again, you pointed out how India has navigated these difficult times, global conflicts, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, Russia, Ukraine, in terms of energy, etc. But is it just a feel-good factor? I mean, apart from how we navigated it for our self-interest, in terms of, is India just a bystander in these global conflicts? Or can we influence them? You were talking about dialogue and...
sometimes, you shouldn't also have strategic overreach.
Okay.
You should be mature and realistic that this is how much you can do and this is what you cannot do. You cannot be a solution to every problem in the world. Where you can be, you try to be. But then you also, with one sign of being kind of clever about all these things, is to also realize the limits of power. So on the Russia-Ukraine, for example, it is evident that what is at stake is a conflict between the two most powerful military blocs and economic powers on the planet. And how much of that can you get into is something that you have to ask yourself and introspect. I mean, you don't rush in unnecessarily. There is a time and space for everything. So you can make your voice heard, you can make your views felt. You have done that individually through the global south. But there is imbalance of power. I mean, that's a reality of international life, that there are some countries which are more unequal than the others. When it comes to, let's say, but for example, other aspects of the conflict, like say, for example, energy or evacuation of Indians from conflict situations. There, of course, you can use your full power because you have that power, and that is much easier to use. And you can get in in a much more robust and a self-confident way than as compared to, let's say, getting into the task of peacemaking, of mediating, etc. Again, on the Israel-Hamas conflict, it's a kind of a very complicated environment. There are multiple players. There is only that much India can do in terms of trying to, again, reduce tensions. There are conflicts and conflicts. There are some which go back decades, maybe more than decades. They're not amenable to solution overnight. Some of them simply have to be managed. And so there again, you have to have a fairly good sense of what is the nature of the conflict you're dealing with. Is it amenable to a resolution? Does it have a solution? And or does it entail only management of tension? So here again, I think we have played a fairly good role, as much as we could, in terms of, the kind of statements we have made, the kind of approaches we have made, let's say even to Iran or to the Arab world or to Israel. I don't think you can do much more than that, because remember, especially when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, historically, the primary mover and influencer in the nature of the conflict, what direction it takes, is the United States. There is no other country in the world. There's no other power. It's not even Europe, actually. So, I think, yes, I mean, we also have to be realistic among ourselves about what India can do, and,
Ambassador, the neighborhood now, for the swearing in, we've seen 7 leaders from both region and the Indian Ocean region who've been invited, who had meetings separately with the Prime Minister as well. How do you see the challenges, if not the setbacks, that we faced in the immediate neighborhood? I mean, probably Sri Lanka has been pulled away from the Chinese orbit. President Muizu, there was a problem, but now he's made his first official visit as president. The neighborhood, your assessment?
Yeah, I think, look, the neighborhood will always remain an area of primary interest to any government. And this is equally true of the Modi government. And so the idea of inviting is an excellent idea. And for me, the good news was that the president of Maldives actually came. And, this has been an opportunity to again mend fences with the Maldives. I think every neighbor of India understands India's primacy in the region. There is no doubt about where India stands and their interactions with India. Now, I've always believed that there is a band within which our relations with neighbors will fluctuate or move. We just have to make sure that we keep within this band of a normal, healthy relationship, which is characterized by constant dialogue, intensive interactions, and giving policy space to your smaller neighbors about how they want to pursue their interests vis-a-vis India, vis-a-vis other powers. But at the same time, not losing sight of the fact that India has that extra responsibility to move towards greater connectivity, to move towards greater integration with its neighbors, and to allow small hiccups to pass away and not allow them to dominate a relationship. So, management of the relationship, management of crisis moments, management of changes in governments in these countries, this is all part and parcel of your neighborhood policy. Sometimes, and many times, there is a intersection between your internal priorities and your external priorities. For example, in the case of Myanmar, there is a clear linkage between your internal stability and Myanmar, or with Bangladesh. So, in the case of Myanmar, we have had to take some steps, which we may not have taken otherwise. So, I think there is a gray zone or a gray line between, classical foreign policy towards the neighborhood versus your own domestic interests. And this kind of a gray zone is a defining characteristic, or at least of those neighbors with whom we have common borders, whether it's maritime or land. So I think we have to keep an eye on Bangladesh, for example, in the next few years. With Nepal, relations are Bangladesh, for example, in the next few years. With Nepal, relations are, moving back to normal. With Sri Lanka, again, they're looking up. With the Maldives, I think we have made a good breakthrough now. Mauritius, Seychelles, which came again with them, luckily, we are doing well. So all in all, I think the idea that you include them and make them part of your success story and allow them to benefit from your success story is very important to give them confidence that India is a helpful neighbor, and if India succeeds, that is a scenario which is good for them. It's not inimical to their interests if India succeeds. So we have to just constantly make a point of the fact that India's success is equivalent to their success. That's really the key. And, governments will come in and out in these countries. That's the nature of the being. There may be little control you have over how changes take place. But I think now there is more familiarity with the Modi government as compared to what it was in 2014 or even 2019. And I think our actions have spoken, whether it was the pandemic or other, HADR, other responses, or simply just building up these connectivities is all part and parcel of this. One message I think which this government has conveyed to all the neighbors is that, India also has red lines, it has security interests, and we would expect those to be respected, just as we would respect their red lines. So if we have that compact or the contract with a neighbor that, India's security interests are important, then everything else follows. But if we start from the presumption that you can damage India's core security interests and yet expect a normal, healthy relationship, that might be difficult.
You see a continued impetus, which we have seen over the last 10 years in two different directions, which is one is West Asia, Gulf region, and then Southeast Asia, ASEAN, Indo-Pacific as well in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think so. I think we should do much more work. I think we've started well, but there should be much more attention to the extended neighborhood, both in West Asia, West Asia, of course, I think we've done fairly well. Yeah. But Central Asia and East Asia and Southeast Asia, I think we need to do much, much more. And that is actually the expectation of these countries. Because, as you grow larger systemically, what happens is that expectations from you also go higher and go up. And, the extended neighborhood begins to expect more from you. Similarly, I think in the Indian Ocean region, whether it's the southwest or the eastern, of course the central, all parts of the Indian Ocean, again, we've done well. It's just a question of whether we have whether we can put in place the capacities to walk the talk. And by capacities, I mean not just financial resources, but I also mean your implementation machinery, human resources, the bandwidth, strategic bandwidth that you have. Because I think this is an unending enterprise of how to expand the boundaries of your influence, which we exercise for millennia. I mean, you just travel to Thailand and Indonesia and Central Asia. It's extraordinary. The impact of Indian civilization and thought is astounding. So the question is, how do we build it up? And, this includes things like Buddhism, the spread of Buddhism, and even Hinduism, texts, language, architecture. I mean, it's a whole world out there. So we are doing a little bit. I definitely can see, when you look at, say, ports, for example, seaports, you are trying to do more. But it's all going to boil down to whether your cake is large enough to be able to allocate the hard financial resources, whether your entities, Indian entities, have the capability to implement projects and compete globally with other countries. So it's a full enterprise, and all of this, again, as I said, is an organic whole. If you grow powerfully, if you have a bigger domestic base, a stronger economic industrial base, it'll transcend into greater capacities. And of course, your soft power here is very much there. So I think India will remain increasingly a powerhouse for the immediate and extended neighborhood. And as your footprint grows, you will be called upon to do even more. And so you will have to have a different mindset to handle frictions, problems, and not allow those to distract you from the more medium, long-term enterprise of asserting and reinventing India's historical role and position in this extended region. And I think that is one of the most exciting projects of foreign policy, because it has so many ramifications. And, like in any activity in field in life, 50% of the battle lies in your mind. Once you begin to think in a certain way, everything else follows. So the success starts from the way you think. And then you translate that thought into practice. And so I would really like to see, and I'm quite hopeful that we will see more of this in the future, in the neighborhood, immediate, in the subcontinent, in the maritime, and in the extended.
The Prime Minister, in one of his interviews, I think during the election process itself, made it very clear and succinct as to what India's position vis-a-vis Pakistan is. You mentioned it earlier as well. I mean, you brought up Pakistan as well. But issues like another attack on a pilgrim bus just on the day of the swearing in, India-Pak, I mean, the fact that we've left Pakistan right till the end itself shows the mindset. It would have been probably one of our first questions years back. But India-Pakistan, Ambassador.
Look, on India-Pakistan, I think, if you look at the policy that has been pursued so far, India has gone about its business, developing its ties, improving its economy, attracting investment, without focusing too much on Pakistan. The message to Pakistan, which seems to have gone through, is that India will go ahead with its agenda of transformation. Number two, India does not really need Pakistan. Pakistan really cannot add or provide solutions to India's problems. Number three, that the red line of terrorism remains more or less intact. There is little negotiation on the issue of terrorism emanating from Pakistan or Pakistan-sponsored proxies or entities. And I think that message is gone. So I think we're okay. The ceasefire is holding. And frankly, no one is missing Pakistan in any activity of life in India. I think we've left Pakistan and tried to give it enough space to come to terms with its own internal contradictions. It's facing problems which it never faced of that magnitude in the last 70 years, whether they're economic, or social, or cultural, or law and order. And they've gone through huge turbulence in these last 4 or 5 years. I don't think India has tried to exploit those weaknesses or those difficulties. For the future, I think, as the Prime Minister and everyone says, we are ready to re-engage I mean, remember the kind of snapping of ties didn't take place by us. It took place by Pakistan in 2019. And in fact, if we look at the evolution of the Pakistani policy of the Modi government, you can see a very interesting evolution starting from 2014, from the 26th of May till, everything which happened right up till the Pulwama attack. So I think there is a whole huge baggage that we have. And this government seems to have taken the view that it is not really practical to keep making the same mistakes of the past and expecting different results. So you move forward with your objectives, both internal and external, and leave Pakistan to sort out itself, to come to terms with how it wants to deal with India. Because, at some stage, you don't have to say these things, but it's obvious, how India has been able to, convert its successes into, or convert its strengths into successes, and how Pakistan is stuttering. So that's how I see Pakistan. I don't see too much sleep being lost on Pakistan unless Pakistan engages or revives its use of terror as a sub-conventional kind of threat to India. Then, of course, I think there will be a response, and I think our people are ready for that. But I think for the moment, it really doesn't loom very large in any of our national priorities.
Ambassador Pankaj Saran, as usual, thank you so much for sharing all your expertise and experience with us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you again.
Pleasure is all ours. And for all our viewers, do send us feedback on this interview. You can follow all our social media sites for the latest that we put up on our website, and interviews like this on our YouTube channel with Ambassador Pankaj Saran. This is Stat News Global. I'm Amitabh P.